Ladies and gents, PepperBelly here, and welcome to another video. Now, it's been over a week since I've actually put one out, and the reason for that is because I became ill. I got sick, like literally New Year's Day, the very Friday on the 1st of this month. I started coming down with symptoms of a cold, a common cold, which is like pretty normal to get here in Canada every winter. That or the flu, but I haven't gotten the flu in ages. But that alone wasn't really the problem. The cold itself was fine. I was like, alright, cool, I'll just fight this off, because, I had family over and everything during the holidays. And they got sick, so I knew it was only inevitable for me to get sick. And it wasn't really bad for them, they got over it quickly, so I was thinking, since the symptoms were pretty light, I would as well. But unfortunately, my immune system and body hates me, and decided to give me a lung infection of bronchitis. So the entire week, I was pretty much just fighting that, staying kind of bedridden somewhat. I mean, I was pretty much functional, except I kind of just tried to stay as relaxed as possible, because having like 60% of your lung capacity able to function, and anything beyond that causes pain and discomfort in the chest, meaning you're basically, you have shortness of breath. You can't take a full inhale, otherwise your lungs feel like they want to implode in your chest. It's not fun at all. It really sucks. And you can't breathe heavily, you can't do anything super physical because of that very reason. But it wasn't all bad, because I got to sit down and binge watch the crap out of Netflix. And one of the shows I actually ended up watching, which got me thinking about the topic of this video and made me want to make this video, was The Insider. Now, if you guys haven't actually heard of this show and you have a Netflix account, I strongly recommend watching this show because it is freaking awesome. And basically it's about a fight choreographer who consults actors and consults for movies, and two of the big name movies that he mentioned is The Bourne Identity and Taken, so he's actually consulted for those movies. The whole point is he draws inspiration from real life, and that's what the whole show is about. He travels the world meeting with the most elite special forces commando units that he can possibly get a hold of and get to meet with, and he trains with them, showing you everything, and he tries to earn their actual unit patch while he's doing it, and it gives you insights into how things actually operate in those environments, how they train, how they do everything, right? It's really fascinating to watch, because, I mean, it's an inside scoop on that world. In the world of what it's like to be a Special Force operator, what it's like to be SWAT, and he actually has a friend who is a member for 20 years. He's been a part of RAID. RAID is the unit that recently, if you are familiar with the Paris attacks that happened, that unit went and took down a whole bunch of those suspects and had to save some hostages. Unfortunately, a lot of hostages died. I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with it if you watch the news. RAID was part of it. In fact, there's actually footage of them intervening, and you can see them actually killing the suspects. Like, one particular moment I fondly remember, I say fondly, but like, I remember very distinctly, was when one of the suspects tries running outside of the entrance, and they light him the fuck up. They pump him full of lead, and they kill him, and then they continue to proceed with their entry to go and secure all the hostages. It was the very first time, I believe, that there was a live feed of RAID in action. And anyway, Elaine is the consultant, and his friend has been in RAID for like 20 years. So he actually, the very final episode, you get to see that. You get to see him training with them, going through scenarios, doing all that kind of stuff. Really interesting show. But the thing that kind of stuck out to me the most was how they mentioned a lot of the things in that show. They talk about a lot of things I talk about on my channel, which is primarily related to weapon handling and fatigue and fitness and all that stuff, right? Which I thought was amusing, because when I look at my Arma 3 fitness, like the fitness update, the fatigue update that was released a long time ago. I don't remember if it was a year ago now, or it was a while back. And I made a video talking about it, and I conducted a real world test, and people were complaining. Like, there were a lot of people talking like, oh, it's not realistic, I know what's realistic, this is excessive, and blah blah, weapons weight is way too high, and, you conducted this test, and it's like, subject yourself to other variables that aren't related to the actual real world test, and basically all these piss poor arguments that just made me, like, hang my head. But, anyway, like, they actually brought up points that I made in those videos. And that was how, under high stress scenarios, so when you put yourself under stress, elevating your heart rate and your breathing rate, shooting isn't that fucking easy. It gets a lot harder. And he shows that in the show in a really, really interesting way, where basically he even mentions himself. If I were to do this on the range in a casual environment, you know, just to shoot targets, because he actually is a really good shot. Most people are good shots. It's really easy to be a good shot when your heart rate is down and you're really relaxed. But when you have to start moving around with like 50 pounds of gear on and you're breathing heavily and your, you know, heart rate's increased, it's a lot harder, and he shows that. And it's interesting to see that because it proves my point, how, you know, soldiers are subjected to intense, stressful scenarios, and shooting is a lot harder to do. Therefore, weapon swing and fatigue are critical aspects in creating a military simulator or a realistic tactical shooter. It's absolutely critical to embed that into a game, to emulate it as closely as possible. Now, obviously, operators are conditioned for this stuff, and when you actually see them doing everything they're doing, they're a hell of a lot better than he is, obviously, because this is what they do. You know, 5 days a week, they're training 8 hours a day to do this stuff, to be as efficient as possible. So I thought it was really interesting. You should definitely watch the show. Like I said, you gotta watch it. I mean, it's, even though it's like subtitled, like it's in French, if you can get past that, like you will enjoy the show. It's really, really good. Another thing they actually mentioned as well is point shooting. This is what I talk about a lot. I'm pretty sure you guys know this. I always like to talk about point shooting, and I hate games that make shooting from the shoulder super inaccurate and ridiculous, because it's just so infuriating and insulting to me as an individual who knows that you can point shoot and it's entirely possible. And he actually used an analogy that I usually use all the time when I try to explain it, which is pointing your finger. If you walk into a room, let's say there's you know, people inside a room, and you walk in and you point your finger at those people. You know, you point at you and you yell bang. You point at another guy, you yell bang. Congratulations. That is what point shooting is. It's that easy. Replace your finger with a firearm, and it's that instinctive and that easy to do. It doesn't require tremendous skill to be able to point shoot at anyone. In fact, point shooting is kind of mandatory for targets with up, like, you know, 10 to 25 meters. And being able to hit targets 10 to 25 meters away while moving is also a standard. So it's kind of interesting to see how, like, all these things I talk about have been brought up in the show, and with actual real-world examples, which is great. But yeah, the whole thing is a reactionary, instinctive thing to do. It's an emergency fallback. You don't point shoot for accuracy. You point shoot to get the target killed as quickly as possible when he surprises you. That's the whole point of it. And it always annoys me how games try to diminish the ability to point shoot and always forces you to aim down your sights, because to me that is complete bullshit. I should be able to point shoot effectively, because in real life I can very damn well do it. Like, come on. But anyway, that's one of the things I want to talk about in this video, but the main topic I want to actually cover now and spend the rest of this video discussing is what the hell happened to games like shooters, military shooters, portraying authentic missions. And that's what annoys me. And I'm going to talk about that now. And what you're seeing here, the game you're actually looking at, is Delta Force Black Hawk Down. One of my all-time favorite games. This was literally the very definition of my childhood. This was the very first game in the world where I would wake up 2 hours before going to school just so I can get in a couple of matches online or co-op scenarios or whatever before I had to go to school. And then I would go to school and I'd come back home and not do my homework and I'd just play this game. That's all I did, like, for like a year and a half, like for almost 2 years, because then the expansion pack came out in 2004, which is probably one of the best expansions I have ever played. To me, out of every game I've ever played, Delta Force Black Hawk Down Team Saber is probably the best expansion pack I've ever encountered in my life. But I'll explain that a little bit later. But the whole point is, every mission you played in this game felt tremendously authentic. The worlds, the missions, everything. For some reason, even though it's dated and you're looking at it now and you're like, oh, this looks kind of old, like, but it's still awesome. Now, it's not a realistic hardcore tactical shooter. In fact, it's very much action oriented, and you can definitely say that this was Call of Duty before Call of Duty was Call of Duty. And I mean that because this was actually released before Call of Duty came out, and it plays a lot like it, to be honest, but a little bit different. And it doesn't have the stupid, like, cone of fire inaccuracy thing. You can actually shoot from the hip pretty accurately. And in fact, in this game, when you're shooting from the hip, you really are shooting from the hip. When you look at your character's animation, the weapon is by his hip. But yeah, anyway, the whole point is, the game has some incredible missions with outstanding objectives that you have to go and do. And I haven't played a game that has done it. And Nova Logic, the developers behind Delta Force Black Hawk Down, are king in this respect, in my mind. They made an entire series. So there's Delta Force, there's Delta Force 2, there's Delta Force Land Warrior, there's Delta Force Task Force Dagger, which is like the only one that actually has the JTF2 in it. Then there's Delta Force Black Hawk Down, Delta Force Black Hawk Down Team Saber, which is the expansion pack. Then you have Delta Force Extreme, which is a remake of the original Delta Force with the new engines. And then Delta Force Extreme 2, which was the last game. There was supposed to be a Delta Force Angel Falls, but unfortunately, it never came out. And in fact, anything from Nova Logic ever since no longer exists. We have no idea what they're doing. Nova Logic has gone underground. They're completely quiet, and they're pretty much dead. It's pretty much a sad reality that they are dead. They no longer exist. Their servers are still up for playing on Nova World, which is their multiplayer service. And that's it. Like, they still sell their games, but that's it, unfortunately. No one knows what else is happening. Of course, there was also the games that they released called Joint Operations, which was supposed to combat or compete with the Battlefield series, which in my mind, it did a really good job because Joint Operations is one of the fucking best games I've ever played, hands down. 150 player multiplayer servers with endlessly sized maps. There are no boundaries. You can fucking go anywhere. You can like run kilometers outside the play zone and nothing will happen other than being outside the play zone. Like, it's ridiculous. And you're able to create squads, and it was a really, really awesome experience. And in fact, I hate the fact that I didn't have a PC to play it at the time because my PC was inadequate, so I had to turn all the graphics down and play it with really shitty frame rates, and my experience was just limited and not nearly as fun. So I didn't really get to play it in its full glory, which sucks. But I did get to experiment with 50 to 100 man servers, and it's fun. Like, Nova Logic is king at creating some of the best atmospheric, authentic shooter environments I've encountered. And it upsets me why games nowadays are so incapable of doing this. And an example would be the Call of Duty series. Call of Duty has no moments of delivering that authentic experience. A lot of shooters don't. And it's hard to say, like, Squad, which is recent, which is a multiplayer-only shooter, is probably the most accurately represented game that delivers what these games, like the Delta Force series, used to do in the past. And I don't know why that is. Like, I don't know why developers are so afraid to just produce a game where when you play a mission, you are inserted into the mission, and then you extract at the end of it. There's no loading screens in between. And that's how all the Delta Force games used to play out. You inserted via Black Hawk or parachuting or whatever. You have to complete your objectives, and then you exfil by a Black Hawk or a boat or whatever. Every mission played out like that. There was no loading screen in between or super cinematic bullshit scenarios. It played out like you would expect. And because of it, it felt very cinematic. Because of those objectives, you felt like you were really embarking on some of the most incredible missions that these operators would actually be subjected to. It was insanely awesome. And it's depressing why games do not do this anymore. If you look back at the original Delta Force game, even though it's like super old, it's built on a voxel engine, which isn't exactly a bad thing because it had the best grass ever. And I'm not saying grass, I'm saying grass. Delta Force 2 had the best grass system implementation ever devised by a game ever. And what I mean by that is grass can render out to an infinite distance. So if you had a guy in a ghillie suit hiding in a hill like 4 kilometers away, if you zoomed in with a scope, the grass would actually be rendering. Unlike Arma 3 or any other game you see today, where the grass doesn't render, it's just flat terrain at a distance. In that game, you can zoom in with anything, and you can see the grass rendered way out there because it's a voxel engine. And if they're hiding in the grass, they're actually hiding in the grass. It made snipers really snipers. It made using a ghillie suit really effective. It was a really awesome experience, and it crushes my soul as a fan of military games and shooters. I can honestly say I joined the military because of these games, and that's not really a good thing to say. You don't want to be the guy who's like, I'm joining military because I played Call of Duty. But no, I thoroughly enjoyed these games. They opened up my eyes to a whole other world of something I never encountered before, and it got me inspired, or it got me interested in the military lifestyle. Like, it made me research, watch documentaries, watch movies, research as much as I can. So by the time I was 8 years old, I was already set on what I wanted to do with my life. When I was 8 years old, I wanted to be a Delta Force operator. You know, I was like, I'm gonna grow up, I want to be fucking Special Forces, man. That's what I want to do. At 8 years old. 8 years old, I was already like, that's what I want to do. You know, most kids are like, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a movie star. I was just like, no, I want to be a Special Forces operator. That's what I want to do. And at the time I was young, so I didn't really know that there was actually a Canadian variant called the JTF2. But that was it, you know, like, I was obsessed, absolutely obsessed with the idea of special forces and military operations and stuff like that. So I spent my entire, young childhood and teenage years and all that stuff playing these games, trying to get as close as I can to the experience without actually being there myself. And when I was 16, I signed up for the military. It took 2 years. When I was 18, I finally got in. Spent 4 years, and I got out. And I got out for other reasons, and there's, I still think about it all the time. I still think about going back all the time. I won't lie to you, because I enjoyed my military service. Like, I enjoyed being in so much. But, there are times when you gotta move on. But I like games, too. I'm a huge fan of games, and games are a really good way of getting to experience those things without actually putting yourself into those situations. And, again, like, those past military shooters, authenticity, like Black Hawk Down, these missions you embark on, like, it's so cool, and I don't understand why developers don't do it. It's just that simple. Like, one of the coolest missions I've ever encountered in my life was when you are in Iran, and this is part of the Team Saber expansion pack for Black Hawk Down, and you're in a convoy, and you're rolling through the desert, and you have to go meet up with these SAS specialists who are gonna, like, try to defuse a bomb that's planted on one of the oil fields, or one of the oil rigs, or whatever, out in the desert. And you're driving through the freaking desert, and there's like shit tons of Iranian soldiers running all over the place, or like whoever the hell they are. I don't remember if they're like local Iranians or whatever the case is. And you have to fucking use your 50 cal, and you're rolling through the desert at like 100 kilometers an hour, just friggin' spraying dudes with a 50 cal. Just punch. You got a couple of armored personnel carriers with you, and like 3 or 4 Humvees, and you're just rolling out, just killing everyone along the way to your objective. And then you finally get there, you disembark, you move to the SAS position. And then once you're there, you have to help them kind of take over the oil plate, like the oil facility, and then you have to let these specialists fly in via Black Hawk, and then cover them while they deal with the issue of the, the oil facility. I forget if it's like a bomb or if there's like some malfunction or something where it's going to detonate. The specialists go in, they're dealing with it, and you have to cover them while that's happening. So like the Iranians are throwing like vehicles at you and like shit tons of soldiers, and you have to like freaking, it's like horde mode, right? You're like cutting down fools, you're killing them left, right, and center, trying to defend them, and then it's done. I forget what happens. I think it explodes anyway. An SAS guy gets killed or gets knocked out. Black Hawk flies in. They drag his ass out. Like, this is back in 2004, all right? Like 2003. I remember even in the original Black Hawk Down game, there was one mission called River Raid, and if one of your guys went down, they flew in a medevac chopper. A Black Hawk would fly in, they would land, a medic would run out, grab him, drag him into the helicopter, and the helicopter would take off. All in real time. No matter where you were in that mission, if your man went down, that's what they would do. And it just makes me think, like, why the fuck don't games do this nowadays? And it infuriates me when I think about how games just become so action-oriented, high-octane cinematic experiences where all these dynamic things that would happen in a real operation do not happen because everything is fucking scripted. And it's disappointing. It really is. Like, I'm looking at a game that came out in 2003 and it has that, medevac extractions. I remember seeing that back in the day. I lost my mind. Your friend like gets taken out. He's on the ground. You're like, oh no. Like, he's not going to just lay dead there. A helicopter will fly in and pull him out. Instead of you having to revive him or some other weird shit. Like, it's a really interesting concept that, like, I don't understand, like, it just infuriates me. It makes me so depressed how gaming in that sector, and that whole shooter authenticity and realism standard that has been set by these games back in the fucking 90s and early 2000s, why we can't have that nowadays. Why we don't have this now. We have the technology to deliver those experiences exponentially better, but we don't. Instead, we have Call of Duty year after year, we have Battlefield, we have all these other games that are, don't get me wrong, they can be fun, but they don't deliver the experiences that I remember from being a childhood. And it's not so much as nostalgia. Nostalgia is a part of it. You can sit there and say, oh man, you're just being nostalgic. Those memories of you were a kid, you were younger, you were experiencing something phenomenal and whatever. I understand that, but when I go back and play those games now, even now, and I still have a phenomenal experience compared to the, games that are out today, then obviously there's something there. Like most of the time, if you're nostalgic about something and you go back and play it, you'll remember how crappy it actually is. In this case, I go back and play it, and I remember just how much better it is. It's kind of like Half-Life 1, right? You play Half-Life 1, or Half-Life 2, and you think, what the hell's happened to gaming nowadays, right? Like, what's going on? Why are games holding your hands? Why is it like such a mundane, pathetic experience that you cannot, like, it's just, that doesn't compare to the past. it's so depressing. And in fact, even remembering one of the games I thoroughly enjoyed on the PlayStation, the original PlayStation, Spec Ops. If you guys ever played Spec Ops on the original PlayStation, those were some pretty fucking sick, like, games, alright? Like, you played as the Rangers, you were the Ranger Regiment, you worked in two-man teams. The whole idea behind that game was freaking exceptional, right? Like, you would be playing an entire mission, but every single, it'd be like one deployment, so one main mission, but there would be loading screens in between. But in between those loading screens, you're always extracted by a helicopter. So you would complete your objective, a Black Hawk would land, it would pick you up, and then when it would pick you up, you're able to pick your next loadout. So you had 5 Rangers sitting in a chopper, and you could choose which ones you wanted to deploy, and you would only choose up to 2. If you lost a man on a mission, by the time you were on your next deployment, there would only be 4 in the helicopter, and you were able to do so up until you had only 2 left. And then once you had once you had 1 Ranger left, you essentially failed because you don't have 2 Rangers to continue on the mission. So, like, and those games portrayed authenticity. The atmosphere of the games back then were just so engaging and so compelling that you actually felt like you were really there in the field. You could feel the grass under your feet. You could feel the wind. You know, you actually knew the enemy was there. It was just such a surreal experience that games nowadays can't deliver. And it sucks. Squad, as I said, is the only thing that's ever come close nowadays. Squad is striking that hammer, like that nail, firmly on the head. It is freaking great. But I want a single player experience like that. I miss the days where I was able to just ride in on a Black Hawk, land, get out, go and do my mission, extract from a helicopter, or something goes wrong, a Black Hawk gets shot down mid-mission, and then I have to fucking go extract the pilot mid-mission, all without a loading screen. Like, what the hell happened to that shit? Anyway, I don't know. I'm just voicing, this is a rant. This is kind of just a rant on the whole state of the industry right now. Obviously, we have games like Ground Branch coming out. We have Squad that's been released so far. There are a few others like Due Process and Interstellar Marines, and like there's a bunch of games that want to achieve some level of that. But I miss that simplicity. I miss the simplicity of delivering that authentic experience without having a ton of loading screens, without making the missions carry over through loading screens, which is basically what Call of Duty does. You go on a mission, congratulations, that mission's done, you're doing the next part of the mission, but it's after another loading screen. Like, I don't understand that. You know, if that was Black Hawk Down, like you're seeing here, that would just be one mission. The only time Black Hawk Down actually split it up was when you actually do the real Black Hawk Down mission where it gets shot down and then you're going through different sections because they're actually long and they require loading screens for the time. But other than that, it was like, it's such a better experience. It's so depressing. Like, it's so depressing why games can't do this now. It's like SWAT 4, you know, you look at SWAT 4 and SWAT 3, phenomenal freaking tactical shooters that grant you that experience, the same kind of experience. You insert, you complete your mission, and you get out. There's no loading screen in between any of that. It's just all one mission. You go in, you do it. And nowadays, we don't have a SWAT 5, and if it was made, I have a feeling it would be turned into what Rainbow Six Siege turned into, or what Star Wars Battlefront turned into. It'd just be a reboot with a completely different skin, not really being what it was originally set out to do, which would ultimately disappoint all the fans. I don't know. I'm sad. Like, that's the only way I could say it. I'm glad I still have these games. I can go back and play them. But I mean, I would be lying to you if I said I don't want these games to be made newer. Like, if I knew the first thing about game development, I'd fucking do it myself. You know, like, I'd make the next SWAT 5 myself. Obviously, I'd have to name it something else for licensing reasons. But if I knew what the hell I was doing, I would do that, you know? I would remake Delta Force Black Hawk Down with a newer engine, newer graphics, newer friggin' weapon handling mechanics and fatigue and all. I would do all of that. I wish I could, but I can't because I don't have the knowledge on how to do that. And acquiring that knowledge takes a long time. So, I mean, I really hope that someday, I mean, once Ground Branch is set in stone and that's finally released and Squad is finally released, people will finally see what it's like to embark on those journeys with highly realistic and authentic experiences that translate to absolutely compelling and beautiful experiences you cannot acquire in any other game. And that will hopefully incentivize and inspire other developers with more funding to embark on that journey as well, to try to develop something along the lines of that, but significantly better. It needs to be done. It needs to be done. We need games like that again. Back when games used to be insanely fun and intriguing, and now they're becoming more mundane. And we're relying on indie developers to deliver those past experiences, which is a shame. I mean, you look at that, we're relying on indie developers to give us what we want because AAA studios are just making the casual games that sell a lot of copies and make the casual lights happy. But, you know, all of us who want those experiences, just, we're not getting them. And it sucks. And it crushes us. It's like, if you guys ever watched the show Futurama, you know the dog that belonged to Fry, and it's sitting there waiting for him to come back? I feel like that dog just sitting there season through season, sitting in the cold in the winter, waiting there in the summer, waiting all day long for the next game to come back to give me that experience. And, you know, thankfully we have Squad, thankfully we have Ground Branch. Hopefully Ground Branch can fucking finish soon because, you know, we want it done soon. And then we'll get those experiences. But until then, we'll just have to wait longer, I guess. My name's been PepperBelly. Thank you guys for joining me on this rant, this super long rant video. And I'll see you guys on the next one.